You're listening to Asset Arrest, helping you see the most exclusive parts of the city.
Hello and welcome to the second episode of Asset Arrest, a podcast in which each episode centres around a viewing of a different luxury property that I attend masquerading as a potential buyer with a different invited guest each time. This episode is the first of a series of 5 or 6 Berlin-based episodes that have been made possible thanks to a residency supported by the New Bridge project in Newcastle, Durham University's Politics of Urban Social Innovation project, and ZKU Centre for Art and Urbanistics in Berlin, where I'm currently living and working from. This episode features a viewing of a 2-bedroom apartment at Schönhauser Allee 55 in Prenzlauer Berg with architectural theorist Tatjana Schneider, whose work is concerned with the social and economic mechanisms of the production of space. Tatjana and I had never met before, and this was my first property I was to view in Berlin. With news of Berlin property prices increasing at a faster rate than anywhere else in the world in recent years, I was intrigued to see what your money can get you here. Since the fall of the wall in 1989, Berlin has reconstructed and reinvented itself, moving through various phases of land and property price increases in the central areas, the selling off of parts to developers from Europe and the US for retail and office developments, virtual projections of globalization towards Berlin achieving global city status, and ongoing struggles around increasing rents and rent control. Schönhauser Allee 55 is a relatively small building with only a handful of apartments inside. I was dealing with an estate agent, not a property developer, and was told that the building was owned by an individual who had previously rented out the flats themselves but now wanted to sell the lot. The properties here ranged from around 0.6 of a million to nearly 4 million euros, and this was supposedly non-negotiable as the owner seemed in no great rush to sell them. I'll now pass over to the brochure to give you a bit more background information on the property.
At the Schönhauser Allee 55, historic flair meets urban luxury. Here, in the heart of Prenzlauer Berg, an exciting and incomparable architecture presents itself, old and new in perfect harmony. It is a house as a symbol of change. Built in the 1850s, this listed building fulfills the dreams of all lovers of Berlin's Wilhelminian-style architecture. Its landstone facade, historic stucco work, and classic old-style floor plans make it an absolute rarity. It is the oldest building in Prenzlauer Berg and was renovated a few years ago in close cooperation with the Office for the Protection of Historical Monuments. Since then, the house has been radiating back to its former glory and impresses with historic details. The merchant Hermann Etig built it in 1899, and it functioned as a laundry factory. In the GDR era, the building serves as a metal furniture factory and carpentry. After the fall of time, the house is empty for a few years and is used as a clubroom and artist studio. In 2010, the former factory was reconstructed true to the original and increased by a penthouse, with much respect for the old fabric and history. Added to this were contemporary components, such as floor-to-ceiling windows, underfloor heating, open kitchens, balconies, and terraces. Apartments with industrial charm, 11 loft apartments and a commercial unit in a former linen factory. Open floor plans, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the charm of industrial architecture. In the apartments of the former linen factory, past and present form a breathtaking synthesis. Restaurants, cafes, and boutiques, as well as the well-preserved old building structure, make up the excellent infrastructure of the district of Prenzlauer Berg. In the streets between Schönhauser Allee, Kastanian Allee, and Papel Allee, Berlin's transformation into one of the most popular cultural metropolises of the world becomes visible and perceptible. Prenzlauer Berg has preserved its charm. Diversity, coupled with the noticeable history that is everywhere, produces this unique blend for which the district is known worldwide. Regardless of whether it's families or singles, entrepreneurs or academics, the central location, good infrastructure with high quality of life, makes the district one of the most popular in the city.
I met Tatjana for a chat on a public bench near the apartment. Hi Tatjana, thanks for joining me to view property on Schönhauser Allee. Maybe you can just introduce yourself briefly and say a bit about what you do?
Okay. I'm Tatjana Schneider. I teach history and theory at the Technical University of Braunschweig. I'm interested in the production of space from a citizen perspective, you could say. I'm interested in how space is produced, why it is produced, and what certain forms of development tend to turn a city into.
And how are you feeling about going to see this property today? Are you familiar at all with the kind of luxury end of property in Berlin or in Germany?
I've never been to view a luxury property. I've never looked at these spaces from the perspective of someone who could potentially buy this. I am familiar with these places on a level of city development, and especially in the context of rent increases, gentrification, and what these developments the consequences these kind of developments have on the development of certain areas.
I think I read that the prices of property in Berlin had increased more within the last 3 years than anywhere else in the world, which is quite incredible. But do you think this is a situation kind of unique to Berlin, or do you think this is happening in other German cities as well?
Oh, it's happening in many other German cities. One of the worst cases is Munich, of course. Munich is
which is a lot more expensive, right?
Munich started off from a much higher level, which is why maybe the percentage increase might not be as dramatic as the one you find in Berlin. So Munich's always been relatively expensive, and in Berlin, property was until very recent, until 10, 15 years ago, probably very cheap. Berlin is also traditionally a city which has a very, very high rental market. So most flats in Berlin are rented, and this differs slightly to other countries. But Munich certainly and Hamburg have a very intense property market in that spectrum as well. But because they've always been a little bit more expensive, I think this city, Berlin, felt it more than other German cities.
Yeah, because it's kind of, I guess things have changed in a relatively short space of time here.
That also,
and that kind of, and I don't know, from what I'm kind of looking at with these kind of new property developments and from reading various things, it seems that it's also this particular history in Berlin that's being used as a way to kind of, you can own property on where, where the wall used to be. You can own luxury property here now. So I think I'm viewing a place next week that's acclaimed to be the first high-rise living apartment in Berlin when it was built, and was built just beside what was the last remaining part of the wall.
Ostbahnhof.
Yeah, I mean the place is it's called living levels or something.
Okay.
But I'm not very familiar. This is my first viewing here, so I'm going in quite naively.
Yeah. I mean we're sitting here in a square, and around us are clearly also rental apartments, and you see the sign which is on the wall of that grey house, which says "Stop wailing, hunt the rent shark." Yeah. So it's interesting, no? These kind of developments in a context of an area that really until very recently was super cheap, but everyone is feeling the increases, is feeling how much rents can still increase and are being increased because of properties like this also, of course. No? There's a lot of money coming into the area, and it's not just the housing, obviously, that changes. It's the cafes that are popping up. It's the little shops that are popping up. It's this and that and the other. I don't want to say they're dangerous as such, but of course they have an impact on the existing population, quite an intense impact.
So there could be rent control, but basically you might find yourself living in an area where you can't afford to buy food in the shops.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm wondering, I was reading some of your writing about flexible housing.
Okay.
I don't know if you could maybe just say a little bit about how that might relate to current housing developments that are springing up. I mean, which for me, for example, the type of housing I see being built in London is incredibly crazy kind of inbuilt obsolescence. These places look like they're not going to last 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, they feel flimsy. They feel the quality is kind of dreadful.
Okay, so I'm really looking forward to seeing that place, because I have a sense, and we'll see whether it's true or not, that these properties in the German context tend to be relatively well constructed. So there is these types of flats, similar to the UK, but from a construction end, very, very different. They are seen as obviously investment opportunities also for old age. You're just realizing, I think, that I'm not too familiar with exactly what type of people are moving into these things. No?
Yeah.
But what tends to happen is that is similar in Vienna, is that a particular type of flat is being designed and built that is of very, very high quality. So not at all flimsy, not at all in the same kind of built-in obsolescence that you find in the UK buildings, but buildings that can actually change, that are adaptable, that have a high degree of flexibility. But we'll have to see what we come out with.
I mean, from looking at the photographs and like the specs, the square footage, I'm like, wow, this looks infinitely better quality and better value than obviously anything you get in London.
What you find with developers and banks and also consultants who advise on which properties to buy as investment, you find that they emphasize the specs of a building quite, they put that into the center of attention. No? So they say, watch out for the quality of the fittings, for example, or this building you're investing in, it should have a very high quality finishings in terms of floors, in terms of windows. Now, low energy standards, I think, are enforced much more in Germany than they are in the UK, which is why obviously a certain type of materials, a certain type of construction is also emphasized as being better than other standards. So these brochures, they say, for example, that don't go for concrete buildings. No, use buildings that were built with bricks because they have a better climate afterwards. So the architectural specifications, especially for this type of property, I think are absolutely at the top level. But we'll have to see. No, we could ask them what the building is constructed with, how it performed an energy level, which would be interesting because this is obviously something. It's seen as an investment into the future, keeping your energy cost low. I think there's a much stronger sense here of the impact you might have as someone paying your energy bills and so on. I think it's a big topic.
People are more sensible.
Well, I don't know, but it seems at odds also with the international property, the international buyers that are potentially buying these flats also, who might not be familiar with that kind of discussion.
But I think it still becomes a selling point for anyone, right?
Yeah, probably.
That becomes the unique selling point of German property, perhaps.
And it's not like this end of the market there's quite a bit of stuff on the market, I feel. And maybe you know better than I, but I don't think that it's very tight. So I don't think you only have 5 properties and 2,000 people wanting to buy those. No, it's more like a relatively stretched. There's a lot of stuff out, and
already for me, just making appointments is very different to London because we're making appointments to go and see actual apartments. It's not to see a showroom where the apartment will be finished in 4 years, and it's already sold and been sold on 3 times before it's finished. Exactly. So I guess you have to be more competitive with the quality.
Much more competitive, I think, because this is what sells in the end, and you go in and can actually feel the place rather than just having to imagine it on plans. And,
it's like you're not just going online and buying a
you touch it, you open a window, you can see out of that window. I think because of that, all of it is probably of much higher quality. You can see the flaws when you go in. You can feel when walls are hollow, when it's built cheaply. You can see it quickly. Whereas when you only look at plans, you don't see that stuff.
Oh, I'm sold already. I have a feeling it's going to be quite nice. I mean, you'd expect that for 1.5 million euros.
No, absolutely, But I'm intrigued about the potential neighbors, also the neighboring houses, the kind of people selling it, whether they only have this one property or whether they have more. Whether they're specialized on sort of
own it, live in it,
or whether it's a small investor or part of a bigger empire, how they position themselves in that market here.
I'm not really sure what this means, but I keep thinking about this idea of the generic in relation to housing and architecture and cities, something being kind of generic or standardised, or I guess because for me this project is looking at these properties that are typically marketed to a global audience. There seems to be this imagined standardised ideal of what people are after.
Yeah.
And then the result is obviously that you feel like you see exactly the same buildings and properties springing up in all these major cities. Is that something that you feel is happening? Does this idea of the generic not really exist?
I think it exists in some parts of the world, in many parts of the world, but I feel that many of the properties here in this city play with a different idea. So you mentioned before that there seems to be a strong emphasis on the embedding of those properties into some kind of historic trajectory, that you would become part of a city that was divided and it's now unified, and you can look still onto that strip where the division of the city was. There's other bits and other buildings which deal with that unique Berlin apartment house condition. So for me, Berlin seems to be at the moment, at least, still much less about these generic ideas of what living might mean or what you might buy also off plan, but be about a very particular situation, a very sort of sentimental situation. I think also for many people, many Americans also have a very sentimental relationship, I think, with the city, and so do the British, I think, because of that, because of the war, what happened after the war, and how all of that developed. So for me, this kind of sentiment, I think, is in the city here stronger than in other places. But what you're referring to, this generic idea of what things are, you do find it, of course, speculative developments in whether you go to India, to Australia, to the US, to the UK, to maybe even Frankfurt, no? Because in Frankfurt you also have that particular global audience that might be expected to find a standard that
it goes maybe hand in hand with finance.
But the finance as well. No? Frankfurt would have been a city to mention as well earlier on, no? In terms of German cities who are experiencing that kind of thing. And Frankfurt in particular, of course, because of Brexit and financial things moving over to that city. Here, I think it's not so much of an issue, but of course it is, no? Because also you have the same global firms building things. You have the same global companies providing materials for these buildings. You have certain standards, building standards in terms of sizes of building material that are global. You have the same financial systems that are financing properties. So there is a certain level of genericness because of the globalization, I think, of the building and financial industries.
Yeah, but I guess it's also, I mean, I hate to use this word, but it's like it's perceived as such a creative city, you know, a city for artists and perhaps alternative ways of living, maybe less so now, but I guess that is taken into consideration by those who build buildings and sell apartments.
So I think it's the same kind of sentiment that that comes into these kind of things. No, also, so it's not just the wall, of course, no, but it's the relative diversity as well that comes into that. No, the anarchists and lots of different groups. It's got a great club culture, and so people might still remember it from raving here in the early 90s, and they've now come into some bit of money, and now you're going back to those roots, and so it's these kind of memory machines which I think are at play here in this city. And it's still a city where you can afford, no? So it's not like London, it's not like Tokyo, it's not like Paris even, where you only get a shoebox for that kind of money. But it's still spacious, it still has a lot of parks, it's green, no? It's easy to get around, you can cycle, so it's got a very high living standard in many ways. And I think this is super attractive, especially in this context, London, Berlin, and other US cities. No, it's still cheap. 1.5 million for a 2-bedroom flat on a global level. It's for a certain spectrum. It's still cheap in the middle of the city. No, with a super
nice city.
high. So it's perverse. it's absolutely perverse. But you might have flats around here which still have a rental price of, I don't know, €5 per square meters or even lower than that. So I know a property relatively close by, which is owned by the Mietshäuser Syndikat, and they pay €2.80 for a square meter. Now, so you live on 150, 200 square meters for €500. So yeah, and within that context, you have these. I don't know what this would work out at in terms of a rental price if you were to buy it to let out again. But you'd probably go to 20, €25 per square meters. Yes. And
I read that this was a lot of people who did start investing in property here, like people who were not that familiar with Germany. Then bought the property and then were realised that they couldn't charge such high rents because there is control and the investment basically failed. So they have to sell it or they just have to live in it or something. But I think that's quite nice.
It's still on the market, I guess.
It's
not
better than
handing it out for €5 suddenly or so.
Okay, we shall go now and see the property and then see what happens again.
Asset Arrest, your global agent for accessing the property you can't afford.
Okay, so we're just fresh out of our viewing of Schönhauser Allee 55. What were your impressions, Tatjana?
Well, I was a little bit surprised. No, I'm from the brochures that I looked at and the documentation you sent me. I expected this to be much more stunning in a way and much more done up. Yeah, it was. It looked. Yeah, it wasn't at all. There was a kitchen in there. There was a bathroom, but there were holes in the wall. And,
the floor didn't look like it did in the brochure.
And the floor was different and hadn't been properly cleaned. So I would have expected a place that is advertised for that much money to be presented in a different fashion, at least. Let's put it that way. Now, lovely courtyard and quite spacious, but in the end, I don't know, I didn't really think it was worth 1.4 million, but I'm not familiar with the market, no? And you coming from London, you might think differently about this, but it felt a little, So we talked about flimsiness before, and much of it felt flimsy.
That's what I thought, especially about the kitchen, the fittings, everything was very flimsy there. Which if you pay that in London, you'll get something that at least looks like it's better quality, even if it falls apart.
The flooring in the bathroom was relatively cheap, no? The kitchen...
Yeah, it did surprise me in that way. I mean, I did think in terms of space, I thought it was very large, but when now I'm reflecting, when I'm not in the kind of slightly awkward situation of pretending to be interested, I'm thinking... No, it was just open plan. It wasn't huge, it was just open plan. If you paid that in London and you had, say, part of that living room sectioned off to be a bedroom, then it's kind of normal. That I think it must be illustrative of the price of things increasing so much. I mean, I think that's crazy.
It must be.
That's a lot. That is a lot of money for what that is. I mean, it looks kind of cool, you know. It looks kind of like, you're living in a...
Yeah, and you don't have an opposite, no, really, no. You have just your facing blank wall, the firewall, no, the Brandwand, which sits there, and it's a lovely balcony. But in terms of spatial qualities, there wasn't really that much to it. No? But I think you're absolutely right. It must be indicative of the prices around here. And she was talking about flats in the front building facing the elevated underground. So a relatively noisy road, 107 square meters going for around €700,000. No? 690 she mentioned. Yeah. We should do our sums in terms of square meterage, I think. But it seems dear. It seems quite dear.
But maybe, I mean, is that just to do with because
they're selling it to like a fairly ignorant global market. Like, you know, she's like an Israeli investor.
Yeah.
You know, people who don't really understand the value of things in the city.
Yeah, it could be.
Because
yeah,
otherwise,
people with lots of money anyway.
You know, why would you?
No, I don't know.
Or maybe it's like they're good at branding and marketing, so they make it seem worth so much more. And that goes a long way, I guess.
Yeah.
She seemed very confident that was like an amazing deal.
Yeah.
Which I know she's meant to do that as part of her act, but I'm intrigued to view other places that are like more expensive or the same price and see.
But for a city like this, it seems completely out of proportion. And I mean, it comes with all the other awkward things you might expect. Maybe a sort of representative entrance. It wasn't barrier free. I don't know whether you noticed the step going into the apartment, no? And then the steps from the courtyard into the building, so not barrier free at all. The parking was there, but felt really tight and awkward in the basement. No, the lift down and this funny fanning out of cars there, and the entrance situation into the building. I mean, it's typically Berlin in a way, no? But it's a little bit rough, but not too rough. But it's not that kind of representative entrance that you might expect to.
Yeah, I kind of liked that, but that, I mean, it doesn't add up with the price.
The understatement of
but
it.
You know, for that price in London, if you get like a new build place, you're probably going to have like a concierge.
Yeah. No, for it seems low key, and this is what's scary maybe as well. And you might
low
see
key
that,
with a high price.
Yeah, low key with a high price. But maybe that's really an indication of that you don't really get that much for that amount of money any longer in Berlin, But she talked maybe something also, again, she talked of international investors, many people in the building speaking English. Yeah.
Disappointing.
Yeah, no, because, I was really expecting more. You know, we talked about, when I said earlier that things tend to be of really high quality as well. And I was completely struck by how low the quality seemed and how little this place had been done up. I think I were the estate agent. I think I would have spent a couple of €1,000 to clean it up at least. Clean the floors and clean the walls and make it look a little bit more presentable. Seems a little bit...
I think the owner would have done that,
laissez-faire about it. It scares me a little bit because can ask a lot for something that
and
a
then
little bit shitty in the end.
If they can do that and if they can sell these things, then the impact that has on everyone else in the city. Okay, well, thanks for coming to see that with me, and I guess we won't be buying it.
No.
In his 2006 essay, Euro Commentary, Anglophone Urban Studies in the European City, Some Comments on Interpreting Berlin, Alan Latham criticised recent Anglophone writing on Berlin for reflecting a consensus position that used a template defined by globalising neoliberalism. Latham writes, "The blurring out of the rest of the city which occurs through much of this work is a product of focusing so much attention on the prestigious, globally, or even simply nationally orientated developments and the arguments around them. Because, following on from everything recent Anglophone urban literature has told us, it is these places that really matter. Because we live in a globalising world dominated by global corporations, we need to focus on their behaviour. Because we live in a neoliberalising world orientated exclusively on economic growth, we need to focus on cities' attempts at place marketing. Because we live in a world dominated by consumption and a parallel aestheticisation of public space, we have to look at the spaces that most embody this trend. And of course, the end result of this is a picture of a more polarised, less inclusive city." I'm going to leave you with that thought as I delve further into the luxury property market in Berlin, the rapidly increasing and non-negotiable prices, and how this is affecting the city and its existing communities. Goodbye.